Disney Lucasfilm encountered something insidious at the box office this weekend they didn't expect, as Sony and Blumhouse slammed the red door shut on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But to make matters worse for the $350 million production is the added slap in the face from the irrefutable success by Jim Caviezel and Angel Studios' Sound of Freedom. It's another Disney disaster, folks, because in 3 days, Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible will enter the chat. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Make sure you stick around to the end of this video because we have breaking news from the box office dropping as we're recording. And make sure you join us this afternoon, Sunday, July 9th at 6 p.m. Eastern on Renegade Online, the live show right here on Valiant Renegade. Well, there's no getting around it at this point. The second weekend for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny fell well short of what Disney and Lucasfilm had hoped for, even to the point of losing the #1 position of the weekend, which should be unthinkable for a movie of this scale, to a $16 million fifth installment horror sequel from the Insidious franchise, pulling in almost $33 million now estimated by Deadline magazine, as we see here from Anthony D'Alessandro. Insidious The Red Door slams on Indiana Jones with a $32+ million open. And post-COVID, there's a lot of studios that have been able to make horror work at the box office, including Paramount with Smile, Warner Brothers with Evil Dead Rise, and Universal with Megan, the Black Phone. But not Sony. Not until now. Red Door is opening to $32.65 million. That's estimated so far this weekend. The second best start in the Insidious franchise after Chapter 2's $40.2 million, entombing Indiana Jones in second place with $26.5, again estimated, second weekend. Red Door also reps the best start in the last 2 years for a PG-13 horror flick. Now, this next segment of the article is quite telling if you learn to read between the lines. If you recall a few months ago, when Paramount announced that they were going to move up the release date of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning from Friday to Wednesday this coming week, July 12th, that gave us a signal that they didn't have much faith in what Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny could pull off, electing to pull the Tom Cruise movie back in closer to the second weekend of Indiana Jones. Now, if Indiana Jones had been successful, or at least more successful than it has been, that could possibly have injured Mission Impossible's opening. We're still a few days away from that. But clearly, Paramount seems to have made the right decision to unify the entire global release as best they could, instead of having Mission Impossible come out 2 days earlier in international markets than it did in the U.S. And apparently, Sony Pictures was thinking the same thing. From Blumhouse, The Red Door is their 16th title to open at #1, while tentpoles get all the glory in the post-COVID marketplace. Blumhouse continues to deliver. Sony gets props here for finally getting their hands around a franchise they've always had a financial stake in. And I hear that Sony Motion Picture Group Chairman and CEO Tom Rothman selected the brilliant Daredevil release date here, in between Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and ahead of the Tom Cruise summer box office cyclone, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. Talk about bravado. Typically, studios avoid going in the wake of a big Disney movie, a la Marvel or Lucasfilm. However, rival studio brass often hear when the competition is coming up greatly short in months before a pic's opening. Either that or box office history was telling. Despite its huge $100 million+ opening, the less than fan favorite Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull only held on to #1 for a single weekend back in 2008. The pick unseated in weekend 2 by Sex and the City. Sony Pictures Chairman Tom Rothman was adamant that The Red Door make its release date. Together with Sony co-president Josh Greenstein, they knew it had a bigger hit on their hands with the latest installment of this jump scare movie than any other Insidious title. And no doubt that was an incredibly ballsy move, and it's one that absolutely unequivocally paid off this weekend. This is another embarrassment for the Walt Disney Company with a major tentpole franchise, which is pretty much the only thing that Disney drops into theater these days, are big $200 to $300 or more than $300 million production budget tentpoles, and hope for the best. Well, as it looks right now with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the best just ain't going to be good enough. Now, of course, there was another rom-com this weekend called Joyride, but what's more intriguing to people is this movie that apparently has shown up out of nowhere from Angel Studios. Matter of fact, as I neglected to mention in a previous video, was once going to be distributed by the Walt Disney Company, as Walt Disney acquired the rights to distribute Angel Studios' Sound of Freedom back in 2019 when they spent $70 billion to acquire Fox. Unfortunately for Disney, since then they decided to relinquish that back to Angel, who then did a crowdfunding to get this movie going, and Disney is probably kicking themselves in the face at this point for having made that decision. Sound of Freedom, the film that everyone is talking about, will peg third place with $16.9 million. Again, estimated, I think those numbers could actually be higher as they haven't been able to get a good grip on this film. I think Insidious The Red Door could actually come in slightly higher as projected as well, and it's very possible that Indiana Jones could trend down. But as of right now, according to the article, 38.9, just shy of $40 million over its 6-day run. That's double what they expected this movie to do over that same time period before it opened. And maybe Hollywood should try to learn something here. There is a big, lucrative market out there that they have just been frankly underserving, and some would call it deliberate. But as you can see here, you can make a good movie for just about $10 to $15 million and come up with some big box office returns. One thing noteworthy is that apparently 30% of the audience going to see The Sound of Freedom is Hispanic. That seems a little strange to me, considering that Hollywood keeps telling me that this is a right-wing movie. The audiences for the film also skew older, the same type of demographic that you would expect to go see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny this weekend. They're showing up, at least half of them are showing up for this movie, apparently, as opposed to Indy. And that's only going to get worse once Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible drops in a few days. That's why I really think Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is largely done at this point. But when it comes to Sound of Freedom, it goes to show that maybe Hollywood is underserving a very valuable demographic out there in terms of box office returns. Maybe it's something that they want to take a look at. Let's dive in picture by picture as international figures are now just coming out. We've just got this from the numbers. Insidious, The Red Door, 32.6 on the domestic side and 31.4 on the international side, bringing the total to over $64 million global haul for the opening weekend. That's a stunning opening weekend against a $16 million production budget from Blumhouse. Now, the marketing budget on films like this are a little bit harder to figure out. What we do know is back in 2018, when Blumhouse released The Nun, the marketing spend for that, according to Hollywood Trades, was somewhere around $80 million. And that movie's budget was similar to Insidious, around $20 million in that case. Huge marketing spend because you still have to put this movie into a global footprint, and that's going to cost money no matter what your production budget is. That being said, this movie is already very profitable in terms of its production budget and well on its way to covering its total cost with marketing involved over the next week or so. And of course, this being a Sony distributed picture, it's probably going to wind up on Netflix as part of that multi-year billion-plus dollar deal. At the end of the day, Sony and Blumhouse are going to make a small fortune on Insidious The Red Door. And now, Sound of Freedom, which opened on July 4th, Independence Day, has no international distribution, at least as of this date, with $18.2 million this first weekend for it. Total haul to this point, $40.2 million. That's a heck of a run for the first 6 days of a film of this scale, and it's only going to get better from here. To give you an idea of how well The Sound of Freedom is doing, or maybe how poorly Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is doing, this is the day-by-day chart for Indiana Jones. Now again, Sound of Freedom came out on July 4th. The day before, Indiana Jones had closed out with $72 million in the bank in the domestic market. And as at the close of this weekend, it's at $121 million. That means over the same last 6 days that Sound of Freedom racked up $40 million in the domestic box office, Indiana Jones only racked up about $9 million more. And of course, we're not talking about the second, third, or fourth week of Indiana Jones. We're talking about the 5th day of Indiana Jones when that began. That is a terrible embarrassment for the Walt Disney Company, especially when you put into perspective that The Sound of Freedom was once to be distributed by the Walt Disney Company itself. And finally, the updates to the international numbers for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny have just dropped. After 10 full days in the box office, the entire rest of the world outside of North America has brought in a total of $126 million. If you want to know how bad that is, it racked up almost $70 million in the first 3 days. That means in the past 7 days, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny outside of the US and Canada has only added another $56 million. That brings the grand total to date after 10 full days in the box office, 2 full weekends, to $247.9 million. $250 million globally would have been the minimum that Disney should have been hoping for in its opening 3-day weekend. This is now after 10 days. This is an unmitigated wreck for the Walt Disney Company, and there's no getting around it. In a video I completed a few days ago, I gave Disney some big-time deference to Indiana Jones, saying that, well, maybe it'll leg out all the way to $400 million globally. Now, that generosity seems in serious doubt. At only $250 million after the first 10 days, or not even $250 million, the likelihood that this movie is going to close out somewhere south of $400 million has just increased precipitously. With Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise set to hit theaters in just 3 days, there is nothing left for this film because Indiana Jones is going to lose its very valuable PLF and IMAX screens in the next few days. Those will be off the table. And that same demographic that Disney was counting on to show up in droves for Indiana Jones, that skipped it, apparently, are going to be showing up in droves now for Tom Cruise and Dead Reckoning Part 1. This weekend should solidify the loss figure for the Walt Disney Company on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny at somewhere around or perhaps even north of $250 million, which is a staggering figure for any film. But it's even more humiliating for one of the most beloved IP tentpole franchises in cinema history. This is just what Disney does to properties that it acquires now. We'll be discussing this in far more detail this afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday right here, July 9th on Valiant Renegade with our live show, Renegade Online. Make sure you stick around for that one. Hop in because there's more to cover and more news to discuss. Make sure you leave a comment before you head out the door today. Hit that like and subscribe. And until next time, take care.